I don't want to paraphrase it but that suffering is a great gift if only people knew to use it.
A switch point moment is a moment in time that fundamentally changes your life because of a connection you made with another human being. My name is Shawn P. Neal, and this is the Switch Point Project. And hey, everybody, welcome back. Oh my gosh, it's been a minute since I've been on the microphone on this side. Been busy building a company, no doubt. But let me tell you, when I come back to the Switch Point Project, I bring the guests, and this week we've got quite a guest. Now, I want you to think about this for a minute. Think about being in a catastrophic car accident. You're on your way out of the house one day, you get in the car, you take off, and within an instant, your life changes. That's what happened to Ed Jozsa, and he survived and came back with an amazing story of spirituality, faith, and a personal encounter that he's now sharing with the world. Now, for this episode, I want you to just lean into the fact that you may or may not follow the same line of faith that Ed does, and that's okay, because there's a lot for you to grab onto in this story, regardless, okay? So hang out with me. We're going to go and hear a word from our sponsors, and then we'll be right back with Ed Jozsa talking about the mystic next door. And today I'm here with Ed Jozsa. Ed is, wow, what a story. Let me tell you before we get into this, first of all, this is not for the faint of heart, and there will probably be some graphic details. So if there are children listening, you might want to send them off to another room to play for a few minutes. We're going to talk about Ed's experience in a book that he wrote called The Mystic Next Door. Ed Jozsa, welcome to the Switch Point Project.
Hey, Shawn, it's great to see you. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Likewise. Thank you so much for taking the opportunity. So, let's get right into it. What I want to really preface everyone with is that, this book title, The Mystic Next Door, is just kind of a teaser as to what really is going on inside. There is, very quickly, you're an airplane pilot, is that right?
Yes, sir. I worked for FedEx. I was a captain there. Was there for about 18 years, and currently I am medically disabled. FAA has grounded me due to residual effects from the crash that I was in. So I'm a young man that's basically retired, and which is good. I try to do some work for the Lord wherever the opportunity comes, days like today. So it's
wonderful.
Yeah.
So, and by the way, you that would, if I had a dream job, it would be to fly a plane like that. They'll never let me up there. But.
Well, they let me up there, so everybody's got a chance.
So very, very, let's kind of touch on the surface here. In a nutshell, you had a horrific accident back May 30th, 2017.
That's correct.
So
go ahead.
Yeah, let's talk about that for a minute. If you could just kind of, I know it's in the book. I want to just take reader or listeners back for a second to what happened on that day.
Yeah, so I had my daughter, which is my youngest child, and my middle child, which is my boy. They were, I believe, like 13 and 15 at the time, and we had a neighbor boy. He's taking them to an intramural track practice, and we were going one direction on a little country road, and there was a farm tractor coming the other direction with a little pile up of cars behind them, and a driver never stopped. They ran into the last car as I was passing them, hit that car, drove them across the center lane right into a head-on collision with us. So it was pretty catastrophic. Amazingly, while the children did suffer some minor injuries and some minor broken bones, mostly from the seatbelts, that was the limit of their injuries, thank God. And I I took the brunt of it, and it was more than one doctor, more than one EMT that stated that it was an impossibility for me to live through it, and it was an absolutely most violent impact that I ever imagined. I mean, basically, my car had the force of two cars coming into it, and it literally disintegrated around us. So I ended up being trapped in that car for about 2.5 hours. They cut it out as much as they could, and I was still trapped. So they ended up sedating me, and basically 4 guys played tug of war until I got free. Wow. So yeah, it was. I never lost consciousness. That's the amazing thing, is that I was awake through the entire process. So it was very interesting.
And I think that something important to point out is that, I think we envision that happens in slow motion, but in reality, it's a blink of an eye.
It was a flash. I mean, the road ahead of us was clear. The road behind us was clear. I was looking kind of to my side to make sure I was past the big tractor and his planting equipment, and make sure I could come back up on the road because I'd moved over. And the next thing I know, I saw a quick flash of black, and the car, it literally felt like a bomb went off. I mean, it just exploded loud, and yeah, I mean, I never saw it coming, and it definitely wasn't slow motion. It was live in real time, and as a matter of fact, it became so outrageous. It was beyond the realm of possibility that while the car was still bouncing and spinning around, I thought I was having a dream, because it couldn't possibly be real life. And then it was after, when I realized that I couldn't breathe, and the pain was just so enormous, that I realized, okay, this isn't a dream. This is real, because I'm not waking up. It was amazing. But, the interesting thing is that when I was at that point, as soon as the airbag deflated and I could see again, I felt like I was coming back from somewhere. I felt like I was stuck somewhere else. And the world looked incredibly hazy. And that was something I couldn't quite understand at the time. But as we get into it, I'll kind of explain where that came from. But I knew that I wasn't going to die. And I can't explain why, but I knew that I was going to live. And ironically, if I would have known what I knew, or what they ended up finding out what was wrong with me, I probably would have doubted that I was going to live, because it was an absolute impossibility. But for whatever reason, I just had this feeling, and I attribute that to an interaction with God, and that I knew that I would be okay. I had a peace about me. So it was. Yeah.
And I want to dive into that here in a minute, but really quickly before we get there, because you obviously ended up being transported to intensive care. And just, if you could kind of give us an overview of what your situation was like once you were admitted in, and like what were you facing?
Yeah, so I was trapped in the car for 2.5 hours. Then once they got me out, they put me in an ambulance to stabilize me for another hour or so, and then life flighted me down to Methodist IU Hospital, which is again, this is a story of just miracles and how God places gifts in our lives, throughout our lives, and sometimes those gifts were placed decades before. And it's almost as if they're there in preparation for what we will need. It's truly amazing, his providence. But I was life flighted down to Methodist IU Hospital, which ironically is where they send all of the race car drivers from the speedway that get into horrific crashes. So the doctors there are actually very well versed in saving horrendous car accident victims, and so they didn't know what was wrong with me. I had a lot of things wrong with me. Obviously, they saw a lot of bones that were sticking through my skin everywhere, but they sent me through a bunch of CAT scans and MRIs, and they found just an absolute slew of things. The first most miraculous thing was that my spleen was disintegrated, and that injury is a 20-minute lifespan. And at the time when they finally got me into surgery, I was approaching 5 hours. And so again, the doctors could not explain how I didn't bleed out. And then I had, multiple bones that were compound fractures that ended up being sheared off from the force of the impact. So once they broke the skin, they separated from my body. So, that was arms and legs, shattered hip, even the lenses of my eyes were damaged. I had 2 collapsed lungs, which again, in the condition that I was in and the way I was pinned in the car, they can't understand how I continued to live with the 2 collapsed lungs and being basically smashed so that I couldn't inhale. So again, the fact that I was there for 2.5 hours with no oxygen coming in, it was another reason why they looked at me. I had the abdominal wall muscles, the muscles, the intercostal muscles between my ribs were actually herniated out. They were blown out from the impact. And that took months for them to figure out how to fix, because that injury doesn't have a name. And the reason for it is they've seen that injury repeatedly, but it's always in cadavers, because the blunt force that it takes to separate those muscles generally kills you. And so I was the first guy to live through that. Again, another, miracle. And again, like I say, this is a story of miracle after miracle, but I would end up having 7 surgeries in the first 7 days. And to date, I'm at about 22 surgeries overall. But yeah, I mean, I was a mess, and there was a very real possibility, at least on the doctor's side of things, that I would not make it through the night.
Wow. And so, and I think what you're describing is something that, if you've not experienced a wreck like that, it's hard for us to even imagine. I mean, it's really difficult to even put those thoughts into context. You're laying there. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I'm going to assume that the pain is so great that it's just almost impossible to deal with.
So the pain was pretty bad when I was in the car, but there's a blessing of shock, where shock can cause your body to start shutting down. It also limits how much pain you can feel. But once the body recovers from the shock, which the doctors help you to do, then you get to experience the full brunt of that pain. And I remember waking up on the operating table, and I'm looking at the doctors over my head. There's a big bright light, and I remember the pain being at a level that I did not know existed. And I said to myself, it would have been easier to choose death. And then I immediately thought, wait a minute, did I have a choice? And then, of course, they realized I was up because I was looking at them. And then they obviously turned up the juice, and I went back to sleep. But that pain was saturating. It was overwhelming. I did not know that that level of pain existed. And once I was done, in between the surgeries, I basically had 1 or 2 surgeries a day. In between those, I had a breathing tube in, which was horrible. And I remember just being in absolute agony. People moving in the room hurt me. It was an overload of senses. And I just remember looking at that there was a clock on the wall with a second hand. And I just remember looking at that second hand, and between each tick, I would think, I can make it till the next second. And I lived that way for the first 7 days, second by second, setting a goal to live through the pain. And there was nothing that changed it. The only thing that would happen was it would get worse. There were times that they had to move me. And I had bones broken everywhere. I had 8 broken ribs. I had, arms were broken, legs were broken, hips broken, organs were damaged. You name it, it had happened. And when they would move me, that level of constant pain, it just would shoot up. I mean, I was at an 11, and then they would move me, and it would go to a 14. It's
Wow.
off the scale. Yeah.
Yeah. And you talk about living second to second. And I just, to clarify, when we're in some of, the emotional traumas of life, not a horrific car accident, but when we're going through one of those moments in life where everything seems to fall apart.
Yeah.
We go into that survival mode, the same as you're describing. Is you live second to second. How do I get from here until that next second so I can just make it? But as often happens, you had an experience that brought you over and above that. And that's really kind of what this book hits on. Tell me about that experience, because in all of this stuff that you're discussing, this brought you to a different side and a different way of viewing everything that happened to you.
I had the easy part in all of this. It was my friends and family that this was hard on. You could see it on their faces when they would come in. I mean, they just looked at me like I was a dead man. They were terrified. And so I decided when I got into the step down unit, I said, look, everybody, we know I'm going to be fine. You guys can go home, get some rest. And that first night, I let them all go home, and I was alone in the room, and it was a very small room and cinder block walls. And I remember on one of the cinder block walls I noticed that this little square, like, maybe the size of a cell phone, was just brilliantly bright. And as I looked at it, it was as if my body was transported through that, and I just went through that light, and I came out to another place where I was looking at a scene from above that I realized at that moment, that this was a memory. I remembered when this happened. And then next thing I know, I was no longer looking at it from above, but I was there, and I didn't have a body. I was suspended, but I was looking as if I was on my back, if I had a back. And I could see all around me. I couldn't move. I couldn't touch anything. But the first thing that I noticed was that I was outside of time. And I can't even explain knowing how you would know you were outside of time, but I knew that time did not exist for me anymore. And I also had like an unbelievable clarity. I could see like I've never seen before, and things were so clear that it almost hurt. And the most horrific thing was that I realized that God holds, and this is something that I knew because I had the knowledge of the world. I knew that at this moment, everything that I experienced was not special to me, but it applies to everyone. And I realized that God holds all of our souls. He holds every single one of them. And my soul dwelled in the center of my chest. And I realized that God, my whole life, had his hand holding my soul, physically touching it, protecting it. And at that moment, I realized that God no longer was holding my soul. I was alone. And I was terrified. It was horrifying. And when I say it was horrifying, these words, the words that I use when I describe these experiences, they are not adequate. There are not words in our human language to describe what the horror of not having God with you is. And, there was an entity there with me, and I'd always heard that hell was the absence of God. So I asked that entity, I said, am I in hell? And he said, no. And, I'm a Catholic, and we believe in purgatory, a place where, the souls can go while they're awaiting the cleansing to get to see our Lord. And so I thought, well, that's the next step. I asked if I was in purgatory, and he said, no, you were in forever. And I said, what do I do to get out? And he said, that is up to you. And I said, well, how do I do it? And he said, that is up to you. And he was gone. And then I looked up at the ceiling, and the ceiling was this weird, like it was a milky white translucent type ceiling. And there was this red viscous liquid that moved around slowly. And it struck a new fear. And I could feel this white hot burning into my soul that was like, it felt that my soul was 1,000,000 miles deep, and this burning went through it. And I knew that I could get out because that voice that I knew was truth would told me that I could, and I couldn't move. I couldn't see anything. I couldn't touch anything that would help me to get out. But I had this knowledge, and I knew that somehow maybe if I used the knowledge of the world, and I exhausted it. I mean, I recited poetry that I didn't know. I did logic problems that I don't understand. I did math problems that are like the chalkboard math problems, that are all the way across on the movies. I did all of that stuff in my head, and I did it until I exhausted all the knowledge in the world. But the one thing that I didn't do is I didn't pray. And I didn't pray because I did not know prayer existed. And, I've come to understand afterwards through just study, trying to understand my experiences, is that prayer comes from God. If we have the ability to pray, it's because God is with us. The Holy Spirit is with us, and we have that ability to pray. And I was in a place that God was not with me. So not only could I not pray, I didn't know prayer existed. It's a very strange thing. I finally got to the point where I realized that I was there. I saw myself in truth. That's truth with a capital T. I didn't see myself how we all see ourselves, and we think, well, I'm okay, and I'm not doing that many bad things, right? We kind of sugarcoat ourselves, and we look at ourselves. But in truth, if you're given that gift to see yourself in truth, you can see that I was buried under the weight of my sins through my entire life, just buried under them. And I finally got to the point where I just gave up trying to get myself out, because I realized this is where I deserve to be because of my actions. And when I finally resigned to the fact that I could not free myself, then that red viscous liquid seemed to lighten in color, and I thought, oh my gosh, I'm doing it. And then I realized, I'm like, you're not doing anything. You've resigned the fact that you can't do anything. And when I did that, the walls tumbled down, they just disintegrated, and I find myself in this beautifully lush green field, a green like I've never seen, staring up at the most blue, uniquely blue, not earthly blue sky, just beautiful and just peaceful. And that entity was there before, was back, and I knew that he spoke truth. And I said, am I out? And he said, you are out. And I said, is this real? And he said, this is real. And then it went all to black for a moment, and then I opened my eyes, and I'm staring at that wall again. Only the bright light is gone. And I had the realization. I looked at myself and said, oh my God, I don't think I'm going to heaven.
Wow. You talk about, and you said a couple of times that you were told that is up to you.
Yeah.
That is up to you. And I think that there is something in that where, we feel, and especially at times in life, when something beyond our control happens, that we don't have a say in it.
Yeah.
But the message that you kept getting is that is up to you. So what does that mean to you now, as you said on this side of it?
It wasn't until I said, I can't do this. I have no way of doing this. And I stopped trying, is when the Lord was able to step in. And I think, that's why the walls came down, because I gave up on my self-reliance, and I put myself in him. I wasn't like that before. I was an airline pilot. I was a type A personality. I made things happen. And I'm not that way now. I'm more laid back and saying, okay, Lord, how do you want this to go? Where do you want this to go? How are you going to make this work? He will provide. And I've seen that now. I see it all the time. And that was something that, I look at that whole experience as it was a lesson for me. A lot of this stuff I don't even truly understand, as we talk about the mysteries of our faith. And there are things that our limited intellect cannot understand or fathom of God's workings.
And I want to save some things in the book for people, because I want to encourage them to read this. So one question I have for you is, when we look at, you called it truth with a capital T.
Yeah.
And, let's face it, we all want to see ourselves as virtuous and, altruistic. What do you think now, as you talk to people, what do you think is a way for someone to dig into themselves and try to find that truth with a capital T?
How do you look at that greater truth? I have a friend that passed. His name was Ming. He had a brain tumor, and him and I would have these great spiritual talks. And one of the things that he said is, we've really been blessed because we've been given these experiences in our life that make us see and understand of what is really important. And he said, most people haven't gotten to see that yet. Let go of what we think we have control of, because we really don't.
I know that there are, going to be some listeners out there that, they are in a place in their life where their faith is challenged, where, they are seeking, their place with, with their faith in very simple terms. How can you implore them to take those, to find those lessons, even if they're struggling with the faith side of it?
I don't care who you are. I don't care how good your life is. We all have crosses, and some of us have heavier crosses than others. And you have to look at that as a gift. And I know this is absolutely crazy, and I will tell you, the most thankful thing in my life is that I had that wreck. St. Padre Pio suffered quite a bit, and one of his most famous sayings is that I don't want to paraphrase it, but that suffering is a great gift if only people knew to use it.
Ed, if you can, you've got this book, this amazing book that shares the story, and I'm going to encourage our listeners to go out and get it, because you've only shared on here one part of the journey that happened to you.
Yeah, and so for the teaser, so the folks out there know, is that while I had an experience of God's absence, I also got to stand in the presence of the Holy Spirit, and the Holy Spirit physically touched me. And so that is the part of the story. That's the best part of the story, and we didn't really even touch on it. So, it's in the book, and I encourage you to read it because God is great. And without these experiences that He gave me, without going to a place where I lost the Lord, and without going to a place where I got to be with the Lord, I would have never made it through.
And it's for all intents and purposes, it's under 100 pages. So, I mean, it's not a difficult read, but yet it is a difficult read because it really puts you face to face with who we are as humans and what that means. When people want to find the book, when they want to connect with you in your journey and follow what you're doing now to spread the message that you've been given, how can they find the book? How can they reach out to you?
So several ways. I have a website called Presence of God Encounters, and that's presence as in He's with you, PRESENCE, Presence of God Encounters, all one word, .com. PresentGodEncounters.com. On there, I have a blog. I have a daily devotional where you'll get a daily reading. You'll get a Bible verse. You'll get a prayer. It's very quick, easy. I'm on Facebook under Ed Jozsa, Ed Jozsa. You can look me up there. I put little daily devotionals, usually one or two sentences, very quick, very easy, and it's just something about the Lord to help you think about Him that day. The book is available on Amazon. You can also purchase it through my website. If you don't use Amazon, I have a PDF version that you get, and it'll work on pretty much any computer or anything like that. You can open it up. But so the website, there's emails on the back of the book. There's email contact on the website. Yeah.
Ed Jozsa, The Mystic Next Door is the book. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Yeah, man.
I really appreciate you.
Thank you, Shawn. It's great to be here.